Twitter shouldn't have been like a company, it should have been a protocol.
Amazon basically made their market share by infringing on small businesses.
Yeah. Bitcoin isn't just only competing with the US dollar. There's other like currencies out there that just aren't as well kept.
Imagine if insulin, when it was invented, if the guy had decided to patent it, there's so many lives that would not have been saved because of that.
I guess like there's some good for trademarking, but I think it's perhaps being weaponized.
I have two predictions. Number one, Solana is going to flip Ethereum.
Okay.
And number two, within the next 10 years, you're going to be able to go to your bank, and you're going to have a fiat balance, and you're going to have a Bitcoin balance.
Hi everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of the Quarter Life Capital. I'm here with Soham and Matt, and today we're talking about some really interesting topics. I guess about like AI and IP laws, and what that means for our society moving forward, which sounds a bit grandiose, but I think it's actually a lot of applications. So I think, Soham, you shared this news that Jack Dorsey, who was the founder of Twitter, who's now the CEO of Block, which was used to call Square, because that's a lot of things. And he basically tweeted and said that we should abolish all IP laws on Twitter. And Elon Musk retweeted him and said, I agree. So Matt, I think you have many thoughts about like IP laws and Jack Dorsey. So why don't you start there?
Yeah, I mean, I think IP law in general is weird because it's kind of a situation where someone, on one hand, someone comes up with a thing and they should be rewarded for it. But really, ideas should be free, right? Imagine if insulin, when it was invented, if the guy had decided to patent it, there's so many lives that would not have been saved because of that. And I think in the age of technology today, it's, if you think about ideas and AI, the speed of execution matters much more than the ideas itself. Ideas are cheap, but execution was what really matters. And so if we were to abolish IP law, that we would really be able to accelerate the development of what we create as humans. So, and just in general, I think Jack Dorsey is a cool, he's a cool Bitcoiner that's, been trying to push that forward for years.
And I think today I read something in TechCrunch, which is Figma is trying to sue Windsurf, or maybe there's another company, for using the word dev mode. Because apparently Figma got trademarked the word dev mode last month in
That's
the
crazy.
US. And now they're sending a cease and desist letter to another startup for using the word dev mode. So in my opinion, it's ridiculous, it's crazy. On the other hand, like my company's logos are trademarked. So I guess like there's some good for trademarking, but I think it's perhaps being weaponized. The IP system, we saw New York Times suing OpenAI, many other publishers sued and then settled and then sued again. I think innovation does die in these type of environments. And I think it's like, yeah, valid point about that. So Soham, what do you think about this like whole IP law, AI?
Mm-hmm. No, I do think it's important. So I work in like litigation support for like IP or like a decent amount. Done a few cases on it. I think the part that becomes really important is I think what Matt was saying. The idea for like what your motivation becomes is execution, not really the idea itself. When you have no IP laws itself, right? Like we see in China, for example, that's the way it is. It's the speed of execution. That's what wins the game. But I think what ends up happening when you kind of like go into this free wild west, the idea becomes like, again, also China I think is a great example. What ends up happening now is if you get big enough, you kind of have to go down three roads. You either sell to Alibaba, Baidu, or Tencent, right? Like I think only ByteDance really made it out in China outside of those big three. Anything else, it's because those two companies kind of control the whole distribution. Like Tencent controls WeChat. And if you can't get inside of that, it becomes like much more complicated, right? And so I think the idea is that without IP laws, if you're a smaller guy, it becomes so hard for you to be able to fight Goliath, for example, because you don't have any advantage at all. They can kind of just price you out. They can do whatever they want. They can control C, control V to every single way you've kind of like done it. I think like one thing we've seen in like the Western side is like Amazon, for example. In their marketplace, what you see is if you have a product that's like pretty easy to make, but it's selling really well, they'll make the Amazon Basics version of it. And then and then they also just like push that forward, right? And because they control the distribution, they control the Silk Road, quote unquote, it becomes so much easier for their product to be the one that gets sold and you kind of get pushed all the way down. And so then when it comes to like these like disruptive technologies, what will end up happening is the cash cows like Google, Apple, everybody, they can kind of just like force everyone out. And yeah.
Well, I was just curious, like, couldn't you make the argument the other way, actually, that, say a large company has a patent, and then like a small company who might be able to execute faster and more, in a more nimble manner, could actually go and actually compete against the large guy, and you don't have them doing that because the big guys have all the lawyers that are then able to crush them and send the cease and desist. So I guess in some aspects it works both ways.
Yeah. But I guess the point is, in that situation, if the large player is the one that already has the IP, it becomes hard to justify the idea of like why the smaller person should be able to use exactly what somebody else did for success. I think the idea would become, if you're somebody small, you're either coming in with like a better way to do something, right? Like a better way to cut the cheese, to say. So in that case, I don't know how like supportive I would be of that idea, because if I'm a big company, I become successful because of my patent. It makes sense then, like I want to protect that idea. If you can think of something better, then you should be able to like beat me. But if it's the exact same process, I think that becomes kind of a harder.
Yeah, but Amazon basically made their market share by infringing on small businesses.
Yeah.
And I read a whole book about it, actually, about like how they're just copying, and it's like how their teams are structured, right? So they're all KPIs. So some teams, in order to reach KPIs, have to be ruthlessly copying and looking over the seller's marketplace data and seeing who performs the best. So that makes me a little bit sick to hear that. So they ruthlessly infringe on other brands. And when they couldn't compete with the other brand, they lowered their price by 30, 50%, 80% sometimes, just to be the other guys, squeeze them out.
Well, the other thing too is like, okay, well, if companies in China are just able to copy American companies with no problems, but then American companies aren't able to copy each other, well, then you have more, innovation and execution that occurs in China than in America in the first place. So unless you can have patent law that is worldwide, then it's an uneven playing field, isn't it?
And I think one of the things people have been talking about with this new like trade war between USA and China is the idea that if China goes outside the WTO, they don't have any IP protection for like any of the US companies. They can make their own Microsoft Office suite and everything else like that, and just release it into the market.
They probably have.
Yeah.
Many years ago, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
so I think that makes sense. I personally think IP is has become weaponized a lot in many jurisdictions, and I feel like the cost of just getting a patent, the cost of finding a trademark has become quite high as well. I think and personally, I feel like I've tried to file a few trademarks. Patents, and then in the end, I just feel like it's not really worth the time and energy because it becomes public anyways. So I feel like it's a little bit more of the old school thinking about, these things have to be trademarked, have to be patented. But oftentimes it's just an excuse for litigations to happen that cost everybody's money. And I think that's not really a great use of resources or time. So Matt, would you say maybe Jack Dorsey is endorsing abolishing IP laws when it comes to AI? Or do you more prefer, just get rid of it all?
Well, I think he's probably coming at it from a freedom and a libertarian perspective of hey, these things that are created, you shouldn't have these big, megalithic corporations that are able to just, monopolize it with whatever patents, and then we should have free and open innovation. I think that's the side that he's coming from, because he's been a big proponent of Bitcoin, about it being freedom money. He's been a big proponent of, the original Twitter shouldn't have been like a company, it should have been a protocol, which is another thing that he's actually trying to push forward. So I think he's just trying to push for freedom, because as humans, imagine if we're all just in silos and we don't know anything, then we're not able to innovate and grow as a species as quickly. So I think maybe that's the viewpoint that he's thinking from.
The conversation of open source versus closed source is a big one. I know OpenAI was very much on one side before, and has kind of changed a little bit. But overall, I would always be on the side of open source as well. I just think that's the right way to do it. And on a practicality basis too, what we're talking about with the IP laws, it seems really hard in my head to be able to understand how you can get a commercially viable product in the long run that is closed source. I think a lot of OpenAI's lawsuits that you're talking about, the New York Times one, we don't know how it's going to go with fair use and everything along those lines, but it becomes really hard for them to be able to justify their 100 million plus users when a lot of it is off the back of other publishers and laws that are already in place as of now.
Yeah, pretty wild, but anyways.
Well, I'll give it to Trump though for pardoning Ross Ulbricht, who was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 40 years for creating the Silk Road, which he never deserved that much time. This was like the early marketplace for Bitcoin for, people, it was supposed to be a libertarian marketplace where people could, buy and sell, different items. And, obviously drugs was part of that, but, he never deserved that much time in jail. And it's awesome now. He's actually going to be at the Bitcoin Vegas conference and he's going to be speaking. So he's out of the jail cell. It's going to be his first public appearance. So
Wow.
Going to be exciting.
And how many years, if you know, has he served?
I think he served 11 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
He was saying stories like, hey, I don't know if it was his girlfriend or wife. I used to visit him in prison, and he said I used to pay $1 for a hug, basically, because basically in the visiting area they would have a photo booth, right? But it was the only area that they were able to hug each other, because otherwise, in the visiting area you're not allowed to touch. So he's like, I used to pay $1 for a hug, every visit, basically.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, pretty touching.
That's so painful.
It's a very sad story. I'm glad that's happening. SBF, on the other hand, I think it's also looking for a pardon. I think I saw it on the news that he's looking for. What do you think?
Well, I feel like he's the guy that should have got 2 life sentences plus 40 years. He was flooding Bitcoin so hard. He's like, oh no, Bitcoin's going to zero. Meanwhile, he was short Bitcoin on his balance sheet. You know what's wild to me? The only reason that everyone got any money back from the FTX thing was because it took them so long to settle the suit involved with it that the assets went back up.
That's crazy.
So
that's crazy.
I don't know. I feel like he kind of got what he deserved to a certain extent. And but what's bizarre in the legal system to me is that Carolyn Ellison, I think, was still very involved with the whole thing, and she snitched on SBF, so she gets off with 3 years and he gets 25. So the legal system is very bizarre in that manner.
Yeah, but maybe I think the argument is that had they done it now, maybe they wouldn't have gotten that many years of sentences. I think CZ also got many years. I forgot how long he got, but he got out 4 months, right? So Matt, what do you think about the whole crypto regime after basically Trump has been inaugurated? And also after CZ, SBF, and some other people have gone to jail, and maybe some of them came out. What do you think the state of the industry is now?
Well, I think it's really interesting talking about the lending market in particular, because there was a significant amount of leverage that was involved around the 2021, 2022 area.
Mm-hmm.
There was the likes of BlockFi. That was, people were taking out, loans, and then the Bitcoin that was deposited on there was being lent out to other people. That was being lent out to other people, other companies, and they were all levered up on all these things. And when Terra Luna came and collapsed, the entire thing went to zero in essence. And I think that wiped out a lot of the leverage that existed at that time. And I was looking at a recent post on X that was showing the amount of leverage and the amount of lending that's going on in the market. It's a fraction of what it was back then. So is there a lot of leverage that still exists in the market? Yes. Has a lot of it in terms of lending been taken out? Yes, that's true. And I think that provides an opportunity really it means that there's kind of an untapped market there in terms of actually being able to build out, Bitcoin-backed loans in a manner that is more decentralized and more self-custodial, which I think is how it always should have been. I remember I got an email from when we were building Bitcoin-backed loans things back in the day. I got an email from Zach, who was the CEO of BlockFi, and he was like, DeFi is never going to take off. CeFi is the only way forward. And then of course we know what happened to BlockFi. So I just nothing against him, but I think it's just funny looking at that and realizing actually I think that it is building tools that can't be destroyed.
I think people are talking about it not just in a speculative way, but also for an asset that you can get that's going to appreciate long-term in value, not short-term. And we're seeing more of that. So what's your view about the whole industry now?
Yeah, I think we're finally getting to a point where roads are starting to get paved. I think it's been such a long time where you've had an administration that really was just against it and kind of just wanted as little people involved as possible. I think we finally got to a point where you can actually just use these assets. We were talking about David Sachs a while ago. At the top of the White House now, they talk about the idea of digital asset stockpile. They started creating definitions. You have collectibles, you have securities, and you have property, right? And so now you're starting to actually understand what is the difference. We used to say crypto and everything kind of fell under that one bucket. Now, the Trump coin, for example, that's a collectible, right? You're not really going to be using it as an investment. Bitcoin is probably more like property. Ethereum is probably like a security. We're starting to now see this little specifics for it. The idea is that, not what I was talking about in the last episode, that now you can have mark to market for like your digital assets as well. I think that's going to be an incredibly nice way for companies that actually do want to invest in this to be able to actually show off their assets. And then lastly, now banks in the US are finally able to like hold on to crypto. They weren't able to like use that beforehand. So what we were talking about loans and like Bitcoin backed loans, a lot of this stuff, like traditional finance already has like they might not be trusting in terms of like historically, but they're one of the largest players in everything. So it becomes important for them to be able to play in this space as well. And now they can finally start doing that. So I think that's the one like key I'd give like this new administration. It's been exciting to finally see this industry start growing.
I have two predictions. Number one, Solana is going to flip Ethereum.
Okay.
And number two, within the next like 10 years, you're going to be able to go to your bank. You're going to have a fiat balance. You're going to have a Bitcoin balance.
Ooh,
Okay.
that's interesting.
It's really exciting. But the challenge would be that USD is actually basically competing product as of Bitcoin, or do you think that's a competing product, or do you think Bitcoin is more like gold, which is not competing with USD historically?
Yeah, I guess technically you already can kind of do that with the ETF, but I think it's going to be more of a like Bitcoin account, and I don't know what countries are going to have it. I mean, maybe you could already do this in El Salvador. That's a good question. Maybe you can go to the bank and you can get, have a Bitcoin account and a USD account. That's a good question. But I think it does compete. That's what Larry Fink said, right? Yeah. The US dollar is losing its reserve status, and it's at risk to Bitcoin. And I mean, he's loving it because he's making that 0.25% off the BlackRock ETF. So
yeah,
I think the one thing we always talk about is the US dollar, which is the most pristine, like liquid commodity there is, right? I think it becomes important to talk about like the rupee, the yen, like a lot of other currencies, the peso, that you don't have as much trust in the government, or the government doesn't have as much, I guess, like legs around the world to be able to actually control their supply to a certain extent. I think the point is it becomes important to realize that Bitcoin isn't just only competing with the US dollar. There's other like currencies out there that just aren't as well kept, which
that is true. I think it's
competing with.
replacing. It's just like how US dollar is being used in Iran and other Venezuela and other places.
The biggest risks to Bitcoin is governments being fiscally responsible.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think now let's talk about another topic, which is basically OpenAI's new GPT 4.1 model. But I think more importantly is that they are phasing out GPT 4.5, I think merely a month after it's introduced, because potentially it's been very expensive to run. So Matt, I don't know how much you know, but can you bring us up to speed?
Well, I just saw everyone like complaining because they're like, what? ChatGPT, they're replacing 4.5 with 4.1? Wait, they're downgrading it? What's happening? I don't know much about it. I assume that it's going to be maybe it's a model that is more efficient, but still retain some of the properties. I don't know if you guys know.
I think 4.1 is actually higher than 4.5.
Oh, is it?
Supposedly. They're just very bad at naming things.
Oh, they're horrible.
But I think 4.5 like literally runs like energy crazy. I don't have an exact stats about how much energy it generates, but I think on the API pricing, it's basically $80 for a million tokens or something. $80 for a million tokens, and GPT 4.0 is about $10 or like $8 or even less.
I wonder if OpenAI has like periods of time, like for example, like the Pacific is pretty big. The Pacific Ocean is pretty big. So if it was, the middle of the night for most people and it's daytime for Hawaii, right, then there's a good proportion of people that are offline. During those periods of time, is there much less usage of ChatGPT? Maybe they should buy some Bitcoin miners. They could, they could mine Bitcoin when the usage of their GPUs is lower, and then that kind of equals it out. Just an idea.
Yeah. So, what do you think about like the cost of running AI in general?
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that needs to be figured out, is the idea of getting that closer and closer to zero. And it becomes hard because I think the technology itself is so like limited. Like your GPUs literally melt, like the more you use it and stuff like that. Like it becomes really hard for you to be able to like continuously like expand when your actual hardware for itself has a expiry date almost, with like enough usage. And so I think the point is that as this AI keeps going, the cost will start going down. But I think that is the right place to figure out. Like we've seen NVIDIA just with the GPUs that we currently have, how big of a lead they have in the entire market. I think right now they're the second most valuable company on the planet. And so the idea is that that right there is what's going to become the most sought after goal for a lot of companies. And I think we'll be able to finally see something where next 2 to 3 years, these costs start going significantly down. Because I think one thing, George, I've heard you say a couple times, it's a race to the bottom, right? When it comes to these AI languages.
Well, I feel like also like if the cost keeps going down, then eventually we're just going to have, these LLM models all on our own devices, right? Like that's actually so cool, like for self-sovereignty, right? Like then, you have privacy built in, you're able to ask, imagine if you had ChatGPT 4.1, whatever they're calling it. I guess it was 4.0, so now it's 4.1. That's so bad naming. Imagine if you had that like on your own computer and then like you're not worried about privacy and all this stuff. Eventually your computer is like powerful enough, you can run your own Bitcoin node. So you got your Bitcoin node, you got your LLM model, whatever else you want to run. Like eventually we have that. So do you guys think we get to that point with AI? Or do you think it's always going to be like, this huge cluster, like the most powerful model is always like, in the cloud or accessing some service?
I think it has to be in the cloud. I think I was listening to Sam talk about this a little while ago. I think it was on one of the TED Talks. And he was saying that right now, what they have access to is 100 million plus people, just like prompting everything, whatever kind of like insights you have, stuff like that. And it becomes so hard to be able to like argue that a closed, like on your own, like personal laptop model will be as powerful as something that driven by the amount of data that you have, the amount of neural networks you can start keep building. Maybe it gets to a point where we just can't get to the next stage of AI and they equal out.
So Netflix is aiming to join the 1 trillion club by 2030. And why I'm saying this now is because we're entering a very volatile market timing for all the tech stocks. However, Netflix has been really stable and even grown compared to the S&P 500, which has dropped by more than 10-20% over the past couple of weeks. So they're aiming to sign up more users in overseas markets, and they're aiming to push aggressively to be worth $1 trillion. So Soham, what are your thoughts about Netflix goals? And because I think entertainment does play a role in the future of AI. I think more people will consume entertainment. They already have. So what are your thoughts about Netflix's goal and Netflix in general?
Yeah, no. In terms of them getting to $1 trillion, I could see something along those lines. I think they have a good tailwinds on the idea that one, just with the amount of like language that they have been able to tackle because of the fact, just the limitations of like human labor to be able to do something like that. Now with AI, if you can have like real time for every language, every show, I think that changes a lot in terms of like how many people can use Netflix. They already have the data in terms of how to price it for different regions, how it works out. And so you're just kind of like opening up much bigger markets overall. I think that's the first tailwind. I think the second part that I think is much bigger as well is this idea. I remember seeing a stat that right now on the TV, the thing that people use the most is YouTube, and Netflix is number 2, right?
Oh, that's me.
Yeah, exactly. And I watch YouTube on like my TV too. And I think the reason why is because you have like creators that are able to go on and like create something, right? And so now as the cost of creation goes to zero, I think we were talking about in the last episode, like animation is already becoming a lot easier. So as that starts going to zero, when you have a huge cash cow like Netflix that every month they're getting all this revenue that's basically free for them, right? They have a couple of server costs and employee costs, that's it. And so that right there, I think, is the bridge for them to be able to start creating so much more content that other people really won't be able to keep up. And when I say other people, I mean like other streaming platforms like Apple, who has so many other things to focus on, Amazon, who has so many other things to focus on. Netflix's bread and butter will always be streaming.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like even, comparing Netflix versus, Disney Plus versus Amazon Prime. Like Disney is still also focused. They have theme parks, down in Florida. They got to deal with that. And so Netflix is one of the only ones that is like solely focused on that one thing. I also think they have a good reach in like the worldwide market. They did a great job with Squid Games. They're focusing on creating their own content. They're limiting the amount of content that they're licensing from other folks, which means that their licensing fees are minimal. And so I think that's really smart. And so if they can continue to tap into creating great content and doing that worldwide for a worldwide audience, like they were able to do with Squid Games, then I think they're in a really good spot. And I mean, the obvious thing is that software and content are not affected by tariffs at the end of the day. So that's great.
Yeah, that's great. And I think Netflix has also tried to introduce gaming in Netflix. I have not personally played it, but I saw it has GTA San Andreas. It has some like Snake games. which are pretty cool. I think Spotify is also like they were getting into the podcast space many years ago. And at a time, I was like, I use Apple Podcasts. I will never use Spotify to listen to podcasts. That's ridiculous. And now, we all know what happened. So I guess the point is like consumer behaviors always change. And in an entertainment space, I guess changes are coming, right? And personally, I'm really bullish on the entertainment industry as a whole, because that's where I see the future is going to be, where people have more time to spend on entertainment. And where are they going to go? Netflix, YouTube, and all the others, right? So, Soham, what's your take on the future of entertainment industry in general?
Yeah, and I think it kind of stays the same. We talked about this 1 or 2 episodes ago too. I really do think the idea is, as the cost for creation of content becomes easier and like cheaper, the idea of like video games, like movies, TV shows, everything, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more like customized, like people creating their own versions of something. Or for example, a lot of TV shows, you have like maybe like 10-20% of fans that absolutely love whatever the ending was for a TV show. Maybe not a 20-30% that sort of liked it, not a 20 or 30% that kind of hated it. And you have the passionate ones that absolutely despise the ending, right? And I think when you have a good enough show, with the idea of how cheap it is to create content now, you can kind of cater to all 5 of these fans and like kind of like give endings that are a bit more for like fans itself, right? So I think like that's kind of the way we're going to, is like much more customized content overall.
And I think Netflix might actually do that, because I saw a TikTok, which I don't think is true, but they said basically the second episode of Black Mirror, new season, had 2 different endings, and they're pushing out different endings to different people. And I was like, what the heck? That's the smartest thing I've ever heard. That's amazing. It makes me want to try it and just see what ending I got.
So basically, we become even more siloed, and we become even more lonely.
I feel like that's kind of where it's going. Yeah, I honestly, I do think there's this like 1 week wait, right? Like where I was waiting for like Succession, I was waiting for like White Lotus or whatever. And every week, right, you get to join the Reddit groups, and then you talk to people about like debating different things. I do think that has like a value for certain shows that are more like prestige, that are more like, anticipations, Game of Thrones. Many people they love the wait, right? Whereas I think on Netflix, it's like sometimes you just love to binge shows. They have so many shows, so it doesn't make sense for you to wait a little bit. But I think they did try that with Squid Game season 2 and season 3, because I heard that's basically like one show, and they split into 2 seasons essentially. The second season the second tier or the second half comes up in June, I think.
The other interesting thing with Netflix was like I just prefer to binge all at once. But the other interesting thing with Netflix was Bandersnatch. I don't know if you guys remember. It was like choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
And then like you could choose like, oh, do this action or this action. And it was like,
yeah.
I feel like there was so many like mixed reactions. And now Netflix is like, okay, well, we'll just choose the ending for you because we don't have information. And then you're talking with your friend. You're like, oh, what did you think of the ending of this show or that show? You guys realize it's different. Like this is going to create so many like, weird things that are going to happen. You're going to have friend groups that are like, oh, I'm only friends with the people that had this ending, or
But like I personally, I got onto YouTube to see alternative endings for movies. There's like this movie Get Out. They have like 2 endings. So there's another ending which I'm not gonna spoil you, but you can go on YouTube and find out like what's the other half like of the actual ending, which is like a more tragic ending. But I was like, oh shoot, it was so interesting to see those different endings.
Yeah.
So I think it would be cool to have those different like endings for the shows, right? And maybe that's how the entertainment will be in the future.
Well, people will be able to generate their own stuff, right? Like imagine, as an individual, like the value, an individual in terms of their creativeness is able to create so much more stuff. So like imagine you describe like a movie that you want to watch. Like eventually, imagine in like 20 years, you can just kind of describe the movie that like you want to watch, and then like make edits to it. Like there's going to be film creators that are literally just like ChatGPT prompt engineers, right? So like you might think of it, like the amount of content that's going to be created in 20 years is going to be ridiculous.
Yeah, like I think right now already you have on Reddit and like all these other forums these fan fictions of like multiple endings, like this person's going here, like this full like descriptive like scene already. That's already being done today. Imagine when you can paste that exact thing and like an AI can actually spit that out as a video.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of amusements like in life. And I think to end the podcast on a note, I do want to bring up another amusements that people have been wondering for like 15 years or so, is that who is Satoshi in Bitcoin? And I think, Matt, you have some basically assumptions or predictions. So let's hear it, and only for entertainment values only.
Well, we were joking earlier about how people were saying, "Oh, Jack Dorsey was Satoshi or whatever." I just think that's so ridiculous. Just to start out, back in 2009, he was managing 2 different companies. He was managing Square and he was managing Twitter. The guy did not have time to create like the Bitcoin Core protocol and like be on the Bitcoin forums and all this nonsense. I heard like an interesting prediction that someone said that was like, Satoshi, just thought of so many things and so many things came together so well at the very beginning. It's a non-zero chance that Satoshi is an alien. I just thought it was funny. Maybe there's an alien race looking at us like, we had a blockchain, so maybe they need one too. That was just for fun. I think for me, like Cal Finney seems to be the most likely. He was a cypherpunk in the early days. And he actually died from a muscle degenerative disease around 2013, which is also lines up when Satoshi like kind of disappeared. He said, "I'm moving on to other things." Cal Finney was also the first person to actually go and run Bitcoin. He actually tweeted on Twitter at the time, like running Bitcoin. And he was also like a marathon runner, before he got his muscle degenerative disease. So there's a bunch of evidence for him. He's the one that I think is most likely, but there's a couple other candidates too. The one person that we absolutely know is not Satoshi is Craig Wright. He's the guy who claims to be Satoshi, and he's sued a bunch of core developers for slander or whatever, for saying he's not Satoshi. He's gone up to company. He was down in Ecuador, and you saw him with like a big certificate, like, the Ecuadorian government says that Craig Wright is Satoshi. It's complete bullshit. Everyone is Satoshi except for Craig Wright. That's all I got to say.
Okay, that's pretty fun. Yeah, and thank you guys for tuning into the episode. As always, if you love the show, give us a rating, give us a like. On wherever you listen to your podcast. And also, as you always, follow us on Twitter. I think we might actually generate a Twitter just for Quarter Life Capital. But in the meantime, you can follow all of us. It's in the description. We're thinking about, as I said, launching a community for all the young people out there who are looking to build something for themselves. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned. And also use Twitter to let us know what you're thinking, anything you want us to cover. We will absolutely appreciate that. So thank you so much, and talk to you next.
Send memes.